Blood drained from Jessica Barnes' face as she heard the auctioneer's hammer strike the wooden block, sealing her fate in the dusty town square of Malad City, Idaho, in the spring of 1876. At 20 years old and 5 months pregnant, she never imagined she'd be standing on an auction block, being sold to the highest bidder to pay off her late husband's debts. Sold to the gentleman in the black hat for $50. The auctioneer bellowed, pointing to a tall figure at the back of the crowd. Jessica couldn't see the buyer through her tears, but she heard whispers rippling through the onlookers. Her hands instinctively moved to her swollen belly, feeling the gentle kick of the child growing inside her. Thomas had been dead only 2 weeks, killed in a mining accident, and already she was being treated like property. Her humanity stripped away by men who claimed her husband owed them money. The crowd parted as her buyer approached, and Jessica steeled herself, determined not to show fear despite her trembling knees. She expected to see one of the leering men who had been eyeing her throughout the auction, or perhaps the owner of the saloon who had made his intentions for her clear. Instead, she found herself looking up at a stern-faced cowboy with piercing blue eyes partially shadowed by his black Stetson. His weathered face told of years under the harsh western sun, though he couldn't be much past 30. A star-shaped badge glinted on his leather vest. "Come along, madam," he said, his voice low and even. He offered his hand to help her down from the platform. "I won't work in your bed," Jessica hissed, ignoring his outstretched hand and climbing down unassisted despite her awkward balance. The cowboy's expression didn't change. "Never asked you to." He turned to the auctioneer, a short man with a waxed mustache who counted the money with gleeful fingers. "The papers." After signing the documents that transferred ownership of her labor and effectively her life to this stranger, Jessica followed him through the crowd. She kept her head high despite the stares and whispers. The townsfolk of Malad City had quickly forgotten that just months ago, she had been a respectable wife to a hard-working miner with dreams of their own homestead. "The name's Daniel Dawson," the cowboy said as they reached the hitching post where a magnificent chestnut stallion waited patiently. "Most folks call me Sheriff Dawson." "Sheriff." Jessica's confusion momentarily overshadowed her fear. Why would the sheriff buy a woman at auction? Daniel Dawson's eyes flicked to her pregnant belly before meeting her gaze directly. "I didn't buy a woman, Miss Barnes. I bought your contract to keep you and that baby safe." He adjusted his hat slightly. "Your husband saved my life in the Black Hills 2 years back. I owe him." Jessica's breath caught in her throat. "You knew Thomas." "Served with him briefly during a militia campaign against raiders." The sheriff's expression softened slightly. He spoke often of his young wife back home. "When I heard what Caldwell and his cronies were planning after Thomas's death, I knew I had to step in." "What do you mean? What were they planning?" Jessica asked, though she had her suspicions based on the way the saloon owner had looked at her. "Nothing that'll happen now," Daniel said firmly, his hand moving instinctively to the revolver on his hip. "That baby's mine to protect now. I promised Thomas if anything happened to him, I'd look out for his family. I aim to keep that promise." Jessica felt the first real sense of relief since Thomas had been carried home broken and bloodied from the mine. Still, suspicion lingered. In her short time in the West, she had learned that kind gestures often carried hidden motives. "And what do you expect in return, Sheriff Dawson?" "Expect you to stay at my ranch until the baby comes. After that, you're free to go if you wish, with enough money to start fresh somewhere else." He mounted his horse and extended his hand down to her. "My housekeeper will see to your comfort. You'll have your own room and privacy." Jessica hesitated, looking back at the town that had so quickly abandoned her. Several men from the auction still lingered, watching the exchange with narrowed eyes. Among them was James Caldwell, the saloon owner who had been particularly vocal about collecting on Thomas's gambling debts. "If I refuse," she asked, though she knew she had few options. "Then I tear up the contract and you're still free," Daniel replied without hesitation. "But I can't guarantee your safety in town. Caldwell's not one to let go of what he thinks should be his." As if on cue, Caldwell spat tobacco juice into the dirt and started walking toward them, two of his men flanking him. "Time to choose, Miss Barnes," Daniel said quietly. Jessica took his hand and allowed him to pull her up behind him on the horse. Whatever fate awaited her at the sheriff's ranch, it had to be better than remaining in a town that had sold her like cattle. "Hold tight," Daniel instructed as he turned his horse toward the road leading out of town. Jessica gripped the sheriff's sturdy frame, feeling the baby kick against her belly as they rode away from Malad City. The sun was beginning its descent behind the western mountains, casting long shadows across the dusty plains. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time since Thomas's death, she felt a flicker of hope. Daniel's ranch sat nestled against the foothills 10 miles outside of town, a modest but well-maintained property with a sturdy 2-story house, a large barn, and several corrals. As they approached, Jessica saw a plume of smoke rising from the chimney, and lights glowed in the windows against the gathering dusk. "Welcome to Dawson Ranch," Daniel said as they dismounted near the hitching post. "It's not much, but it's peaceful." An older woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her weathered face creased into a frown as she spotted Jessica. "Mrs. Holloway," Daniel called, "we have a guest who will be staying with us for a while." The woman's eyes narrowed as they took in Jessica's condition. "Another one of your strays, Sheriff?" she asked, but her tone held more resignation than judgment. "This is Mrs. Barnes. Her husband was a friend." Daniel turned to Jessica. "Mrs. Holloway keeps the house and makes sure I don't starve." "You'll be in good hands with her." Jessica nodded politely to the housekeeper, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look after the ordeal of the day. Her dress was dusty, her hair falling from its pins, and her face was likely streaked with tears and dirt. "The poor thing looks dead on her feet," Mrs. Holloway said, her initial suspicion melting into concern. "Come inside, child. I've got stew on the stove and fresh bread just out of the oven. After you eat, I'll show you to your room." Jessica followed the older woman inside, noting the simple but comfortable furnishings of the house. A large fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, with sturdy chairs arranged nearby. Bookshelves lined another wall, filled with volumes that suggested the sheriff was more educated than his rough exterior implied. "Sit, sit," Mrs. Holloway instructed, pulling out a chair at the kitchen table. "You need to eat for two now." As Mrs. Holloway bustled about serving the meal, Daniel entered and hung his hat on a peg by the door. He removed his gun belt with practiced ease and placed it within easy reach before washing his hands at the basin. "I need to check on a new foal," he said. "I'll be back shortly. Mrs. Holloway will see you settled." After he left, Jessica turned to the housekeeper. "Has he done this before? Brought home women in trouble?" Mrs. Holloway placed a bowl of steaming stew in front of Jessica. "The sheriff has a habit of helping those who can't help themselves. Usually it's orphaned calves or wounded wildlife." She smiled faintly. "You're the first pregnant woman, though he did once bring home a family whose wagon had broken down during a blizzard." "Does he live here alone besides you?" Jessica asked, carefully tasting the stew, which was delicious. "He does." Mrs. Holloway sat across from her. "Been sheriff of Malad City for 5 years now, but he keeps his distance from town when he's not working. Some say he's running from something, but if he is, he's never shared it with me." Jessica thought about Daniel Dawson's promise to protect her baby, a promise apparently made to a man she'd thought had no friends in these parts. Thomas had never mentioned serving with any sheriff or militia. "You know my husband?" she asked. Mrs. Holloway shook her head. "The sheriff doesn't talk much about his past. If he knew your husband, he never mentioned it to me." She studied Jessica's face. "What happened to him, if you don't mind my asking?" "Mining accident," Jessica replied, the words still painful to say. "A tunnel collapsed. They said he died instantly, but I don't know if that's true or if they just told me that for comfort." "I'm sorry, child." The housekeeper reached across the table and patted Jessica's hand. "Life out here can be cruel, especially to women on their own." After the meal, Mrs. Holloway showed Jessica to a clean, simple bedroom on the second floor. A handmade quilt covered the bed, and a pitcher and basin sat on the dresser. "The sheriff's room is at the end of the hall, and mine is downstairs off the kitchen," she explained. "There's a bathroom with a proper tub down the hall. Hot water is a luxury the sheriff insists on. Says after a day in the saddle, a man deserves a proper soak." Left alone, Jessica sat on the edge of the bed, finally allowing herself to process the day's events. She had woken in her small rented room in town, been seized by the creditors before noon, and by sunset found herself in the home of a stranger who claimed to be protecting her for her husband's sake. She placed her hands on her belly, feeling the baby move. "What do you think, little one?" she whispered. "Can we trust this sheriff, or is he just another man with hidden intentions?" The baby kicked in response, and Jessica managed a small smile. Whatever happened, she would protect her child. Thomas might be gone, but she would ensure his baby knew love. Jessica was awakened the next morning by sunlight streaming through the curtains. For a moment, she was disoriented, reaching for Thomas before reality crashed down on her again. She was a widow, pregnant, and living in the home of a man she barely knew. The smell of coffee and bacon drifted up from downstairs, and her stomach rumbled in response. She had eaten little in the days before the auction, too consumed by grief and worry to have much appetite. After washing her face and doing her best to make herself presentable in yesterday's clothes, the only ones she had, Jessica made her way downstairs. She found Mrs. Holloway in the kitchen, turning bacon in a cast iron skillet. "Good morning, Mrs. Barnes," the housekeeper said. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I expected," Jessica admitted. "And please call me Jessica." "Jessica it is, then." Mrs. Holloway gestured to the table. "Sit down. Breakfast will be ready shortly." Daniel Dawson entered through the back door, his shirt already showing sweat marks across the shoulders despite the early hour. "Morning," he said with a brief nod to Jessica before pouring himself a cup of coffee. "Mrs. Holloway," he said after taking a sip, "I'll be heading into town after breakfast. I need you to make a list of things Mrs. Barnes might need." The housekeeper nodded. "Already working on it. The poor girl has nothing but the clothes on her back." Jessica felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment. "I don't want charity." "It's not charity," Daniel replied, his tone matter of fact. "Your labor was purchased at auction, which means your employer is responsible for your basic needs." "My labor? And what exactly will I be doing to earn my keep, Sheriff?" Jessica asked, lifting her chin defiantly. Daniel met her gaze steadily. "Mrs. Holloway could use help with the household chores, within reason given your condition. And I recall Thomas saying you were good with numbers. My ledgers could use organizing. You're not worried I might run off?" A hint of a smile tugged at the corner of Daniel's mouth. "Where would you go, Mrs. Barnes? 10 miles of open country in every direction, and in your condition, I doubt you'd get far on foot. Besides, if you wanted to leave, I'd drive you wherever you wanted to go." Jessica blinked in surprise. You would? I told you yesterday you're not a prisoner. I bought your contract to protect you, not to own you. He set his empty cup down. Now, is there anything specific you need from town? Jessica hesitated, unaccustomed to being asked her preferences after weeks of having her choices stripped away. My mother's locket. It was in my room at the boarding house. Mrs. Wilson might have put it aside for me. Daniel nodded. I'll check. Anything else? No, just... Jessica hesitated again. Thank you, Sheriff. Daniel acknowledged her thanks with another brief nod before turning to Mrs. Holloway to discuss the supplies he needed to purchase. Jessica watched him, trying to reconcile this quiet, respectful man with the imposing figure who had bought her at auction. There was a sadness in his eyes that she recognized the look of someone who had seen too much and lost even more. After breakfast, Daniel rode out and Mrs. Holloway showed Jessica around the house, explaining the daily routines and what light duties she might help with. The housekeeper's initial wariness had been replaced by maternal concern, especially when she noticed Jessica's fatigue after climbing the stairs. The baby's giving you trouble, Mrs. Holloway asked as they folded sheets in the small laundry room off the kitchen. Just making its presence known, Jessica replied, rubbing her lower back. I haven't had anyone to ask about what's normal. My mother died when I was young, and Thomas and I didn't know many families here. How long had you been in Malad City? 8 months. We came west after Thomas heard about the mining opportunities. He had dreams of striking it rich and building us a grand house. Jessica smiled sadly. He was always full of big dreams. Men often are, Mrs. Holloway said with the wisdom of her years. It's women who deal with the realities. By late afternoon, Jessica had learned much about the running of the ranch. It was smaller than many in the area, with just enough cattle and horses to be self-sufficient rather than a commercial operation. Daniel employed 2 ranch hands who lived in a bunkhouse near the barn, but they kept to themselves and took their meals separately. The sheriff values his privacy, Mrs. Holloway explained as she taught Jessica how to make the sourdough bread that was a staple of their meals. Those boys know better than to come to the main house unless invited. How long have you worked for him? Jessica asked, kneading the dough as instructed. Going on 4 years now. My husband was the previous sheriff's deputy. When he was killed chasing bank robbers, I had nowhere to go. Sheriff Dawson offered me this position, said he needed someone to make the place a home. She smiled faintly. I think he was more concerned about me than his house, truth be told. Jessica was about to ask more when the sound of hoofbeats signaled Daniel's return. He entered carrying several packages and a small leather bag that he handed directly to Jessica. Your locket, he said. Mrs. Wilson had set it aside, hoping you'd come back for it. Jessica's fingers trembled as she opened the bag and pulled out the silver heart-shaped locket that had belonged to her mother. Inside was a tiny portrait of her parents on their wedding day. It was the only connection she had to them, having been raised by a distant aunt after their deaths from influenza. Thank you, she whispered, blinking back tears as she fastened it around her neck. Daniel seemed uncomfortable with her emotion. The rest are clothes and things, Mrs. Holloway suggested. There's also a letter for you from Dr. Patterson. He asked me to tell you he's available whenever you need him. Jessica was surprised. Dr. Patterson had been kind during her prenatal visits, but she hadn't expected him to reach out. Did he say anything else? Just that he'd be happy to ride out here when your time comes. Seems he's taken a dislike to how the town treated you. Daniel hung his hat on the peg by the door. You have friends in Malad City, even if it doesn't feel like it right now. Over the next few weeks, Jessica settled into a routine at the Dawson Ranch. She helped Mrs. Holloway with the cooking and lighter household chores, and in the evenings, She worked on organizing Daniel's account books. The sheriff was often away during the day, attending to his duties in town or riding the boundaries of his property. When he was home, Daniel was unfailingly polite but maintained a certain distance. He would ask after her health and whether she needed anything, but personal conversations were rare. Despite this, Jessica found herself watching him when he didn't notice, intrigued by the contrasts in his character, the stern lawman who could also be surprisingly gentle with the animals on his ranch, especially the new foal that had been born weak and needed extra care. One evening in late June, Jessica was sitting on the porch, enjoying the cool breeze after a particularly hot day. Her pregnancy had advanced to the point where her movements were becoming awkward, and she tired easily. She watched as Daniel worked with a young horse in the corral, his movements patient and deliberate. "He has a way with them," Mrs. Holloway said, joining her with 2 glasses of lemonade. "He does," Jessica agreed, accepting the cool drink gratefully. "He's not what I expected." "Few people are once you get to know them." The older woman sat in the rocking chair beside Jessica. "He asks about you, wants to make sure you're comfortable, that the baby's healthy." "He could ask me directly," Jessica pointed out. Mrs. Holloway chuckled. "That would require him to admit he's concerned, and our sheriff isn't one for admitting his feelings." She paused, watching Daniel as he led the horse around the corral. "He was married once, did you know that?" Jessica turned to her in surprise. "No, he's never mentioned it." "It was before he came here. Her name was Mary. She died in childbirth along with their son." Mrs. Holloway's voice softened. "He doesn't speak of it, but I found a photograph once when I was cleaning. Their names were written on the back." Jessica's hand moved instinctively to her belly. "That explains why he's so careful with you." "Yes, I imagine it does," Mrs. Holloway sighed. "I'm telling you this not to gossip, but because I think you should understand him better. He's a good man who's carrying more pain than most." Jessica watched Daniel with new eyes, seeing beyond the stoic exterior to the wounded soul beneath. No wonder he had stepped in at the auction. He couldn't bear to see another woman and child at risk. The next morning, Jessica was alone in the house, Mrs. Holloway having gone to visit her sister in the next county. Daniel had promised to return by midday, but Jessica wasn't concerned about being alone. The ranch was peaceful, and she had come to feel safe there. She was in the kitchen, preparing to bake a pie with the berries she had picked the previous day, when the sound of approaching horses caught her attention. Looking out the window, she saw 3 riders approaching and recognized James Caldwell's stocky figure in the lead. Fear shot through her. Caldwell had made no secret of his intention to acquire her as payment for Thomas's gambling debts. He had been outbid at the auction, but apparently hadn't given up. Jessica moved quickly to the door, securing the bolt before hurrying to the cabinet where Daniel kept a shotgun for emergencies. Mrs. Holloway had shown her how to load and fire it, just in case. Though neither of them had specified what the case might be, her hands trembled as she loaded the weapon, the baby kicking vigorously as if sensing her distress. The riders had reached the front of the house, and she heard Caldwell's voice calling out, "Mrs. Barnes, I know you're in there. Come on out and talk to an old friend." Jessica positioned herself beside the window, out of sight but able to see the men dismounting. Caldwell was flanked by 2 rough-looking individuals she recognized from his saloon. "What do you want, Mr. Caldwell?" she called, trying to keep her voice steady. "Just to talk, pretty lady. Sheriff Dawson's been keeping you all to himself, and that ain't neighborly." His false joviality couldn't mask the menace beneath. "The sheriff will be back any minute," Jessica warned, though she knew Daniel might be hours away depending on his duties. Caldwell laughed. "No, he won't. My boys saw him heading toward the Carson place this morning. Trouble with rustlers, from what I hear. He'll be gone all day." He approached the door, his boots heavy on the porch. "Now be reasonable, Mrs. Barnes. Your husband owed me money, and I mean to collect one way or another." "Sheriff Dawson paid for my contract," Jessica replied, tightening her grip on the shotgun. "A contract obtained under questionable circumstances," Caldwell said. "I've spoken to Judge Miller. He agrees that a widow's debts should be settled properly." Jessica's blood ran cold. Judge Miller was known to be in Caldwell's pocket, making rulings that favored the saloon owner's interests over justice. "I have nothing to give you," she said. "Oh, I think you do." The doorknob rattled as Caldwell tested it. "Now, you can either open this door and come quietly, or my boys can break it down. Either way, you're coming with us." Jessica raised the shotgun. "I'll shoot the first man who tries to enter." There was a pause, then Caldwell's voice, harder now. "You willing to risk that baby of yours in a fight, Mrs. Barnes? Because I guarantee you'll lose." The threat to her child galvanized Jessica. No matter what happened to her, she had to protect her baby. She thought quickly, trying to formulate a plan. The house had a back door that led to the kitchen garden. If she could slip out and make it to the barn, she might be able to saddle a horse and escape. "Give me a minute to get my shawl," she called, hoping to buy time. "1 minute," Caldwell agreed. "Then we're coming in." Jessica moved as quickly as her condition allowed, setting the shotgun aside only long enough to grab a small bag with the few possessions. She treasured her mother's locket, which she was already wearing, a photograph of Thomas, and the baby blanket she had been knitting. She slung the bag across her body, picked up the shotgun again, and headed for the back door. She had just stepped onto the back porch when she heard the crash of the front door being broken open. Heart pounding, Jessica hurried toward the barn, staying close to the garden fence for cover. She had nearly reached it when a shout told her she had been spotted. "There she is!" one of Caldwell's men yelled. Jessica ran the last few yards to the barn, yanking the door open and slipping inside. The dim interior was a stark contrast to the bright sunlight, and it took a moment for her eyes to adjust. The horses nickered nervously at her abrupt entrance. She knew she couldn't outrun the men, especially not in her condition. Fighting was her only option. Jessica positioned herself behind a stack of hay bales, the shotgun ready. When the barn door swung open, she fired a warning shot into the roof beams. "Next one won't miss," she shouted. "You can't shoot all of us before we get to you," Caldwell called from outside the barn. "Put the gun down, Mrs. Barnes, and we'll forget this unpleasantness." Jessica knew he was lying. Once she surrendered the weapon, she would be at their mercy, and Caldwell had none to give. "I'd rather die than go with you," she replied, meaning every word. There was a moment of tense silence, then the sound of horses approaching at a gallop. Relief flooded through Jessica as she recognized Daniel's deep voice calling out. "Caldwell, what the hell are you doing on my property?" The confrontation moved outside, and Jessica could hear the men arguing. She kept the shotgun ready, unwilling to let down her guard until she was certain the danger had passed. The barn door opened slowly, and Daniel's voice called softly, "Jessica, are you all right?" "I'm here," she replied, finally lowering the weapon as he entered. Daniel's face was tight with anger, but his eyes softened with relief when he saw her unharmed. "Did they hurt you?" Jessica shook her head. "They tried to break in. I fired a warning shot when they followed me to the barn." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Remind me never to get on your bad side." He reached for the shotgun, which she gladly relinquished. "Caldwell and his men are leaving. They won't bother you again." "How can you be sure?" Daniel's expression hardened. "Because I've arrested one of his men for breaking and entering, and I've warned Caldwell that the next time he steps foot on this property without invitation, he'll be joining his friend in jail." He offered his hand, and Jessica took it, suddenly feeling the adrenaline drain from her body. Her legs wobbled and Daniel quickly moved to support her. "Easy now," he murmured, his arm strong around her waist. "Let's get you back to the house." As they walked back together, Jessica leaning more heavily on Daniel than she would have liked, she asked, "How did you know to come back?" "I didn't like leaving you alone, even with Mrs. Holloway gone for just the day. I finished my business at the Carson place and headed straight back." His jaw tightened. "Good thing I did." Inside the house, Daniel helped Jessica to a chair and fetched her a glass of water. His eyes darkened when he saw the splintered front door frame. "I'll fix that right away," he said. "Can't have you staying somewhere that's not secure." "I'm sorry about the damage," Jessica said, sipping the water, "and for causing trouble." Daniel looked at her in surprise. "You didn't cause anything. Caldwell's had it coming for a long time." He knelt beside her chair, his expression serious. "Jessica, I need to be honest with you. Caldwell isn't going to give up easily. He has influence with Judge Miller, and he might try to challenge the legality of your contract." "What does that mean for me?" "It means you might not be safe here indefinitely." He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. "I have some connections in Colorado. There's a town where you'd be beyond Caldwell's reach. After the baby comes, I could arrange passage for you both." Jessica felt a strange pang at the thought of leaving. Despite the circumstances that had brought her to the Dawson ranch, she had begun to feel at home there. The idea of starting over again in yet another strange place was daunting. "And until then," she asked, "until then, I'll protect you." The intensity in Daniel's eyes made her breath catch. "I promise to keep you and your baby safe, and I intend to keep that promise." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of feelings neither had acknowledged. Jessica saw Daniel differently now, not just as her rescuer or employer, but as a man who genuinely cared for her well-being. "Thank you," she said softly. Daniel stood, seeming suddenly aware of their closeness. "I should fix that door. Will you be all right for a few minutes?" Jessica nodded, watching as he gathered tools from a cabinet. In the span of a few hours, her understanding of her situation had fundamentally changed. She wasn't just staying at the ranch out of necessity or obligation. She was staying because, against all odds, she had found someone who was willing to stand between her and danger without asking anything in return. As the summer progressed, Jessica's pregnancy advanced, and with it, her feelings for Daniel Dawson grew more complex. What had begun as gratitude had evolved into something deeper, though she was careful not to show it. She was, after all, still grieving Thomas, and Daniel had given no indication that he saw her as anything more than a responsibility, a promise to be kept. July brought scorching heat to Idaho, making everyone on the ranch rise early to complete the most strenuous tasks before the worst of the day's temperatures. Jessica would often wake at dawn to find Daniel already gone, only to return mid-morning for a brief meal before heading out again. One particularly hot afternoon, Jessica was sitting in the shade of the porch, working on a small quilt for the baby, when she saw Daniel returning from the far pasture. He was shirtless, his skin bronzed by the sun, sweat glistening on his shoulders as he led his horse toward the barn. Jessica found herself unable to look away, struck by the raw masculinity of him. Mrs. Holloway, coming out with a pitcher of lemonade, caught her staring and smiled knowingly. "He's a fine-looking man, our sheriff." Jessica blushed furiously. "I was just wondering if he's working too hard in this heat." "Hum," Mrs. Holloway replied, not believing her for a second. "Well, this lemonade should cool him down. Why don't you take it to him?" Before Jessica could protest, the housekeeper had handed her the tray and retreated inside with a mischievous glint in her eye. Balancing the tray carefully, Jessica made her way to the barn, her heart beating faster with each step. She found Daniel grooming his horse, still bare from the waist up. "Mrs. Holloway thought you might be thirsty," she said, setting the tray on a barrel. Daniel turned, seeming unsurprised to see her. "Thank you." He accepted the glass she offered, draining it in one long swallow. "It's hotter than blazes out there today." Jessica poured him another glass, trying not to notice the way his muscles moved beneath his sun-darkened skin or the small scar just below his collarbone. "Mrs. Holloway says there's a storm coming tonight. Should bring some relief. Let's hope so." Daniel set the empty glass down and reached for his shirt, hanging on a nearby hook. "How are you feeling in this heat? It can't be comfortable in your condition," I manage. Jessica rested a hand on her stomach, which now protruded prominently. "The baby's active today. Feels like he's practicing for a rodeo in there." Daniel asked, a hint of a smile playing at his lips as he buttoned his shirt. "Just a feeling I have." She hesitated, then added, "Would you like to feel? He's kicking up a storm right now." Daniel seemed taken aback by the offer, but after a moment he nodded. Jessica took his hand and placed it on the side of her belly where the baby was most active. Almost immediately, there was a strong kick against his palm. Daniel's eyes widened in wonder. "That's something," he said softly. "It is, isn't it?" Jessica smiled, feeling a connection to him in that shared moment of awe. Neither of them moved for several heartbeats, his hand warm against her through the thin fabric of her dress. Then the horse nickered, breaking the spell, and Daniel stepped back. "I should finish up here," he said, his voice slightly rough. "Storm's coming, like you said." Jessica nodded, gathering the tray. "Of course, dinner will be ready soon." As she walked back to the house, she could feel his eyes on her, and she wondered if perhaps she wasn't alone in her growing feelings. The storm that night was spectacular, with lightning illuminating the mountains and thunder rattling the windows. Jessica found sleep elusive, partly due to the weather and partly due to the baby's restless movements. She was sitting up in bed, rubbing her belly and listening to the rain when a particularly loud crack of thunder shook the house. Moments later, there was a soft knock at her door. "Jessica." "Are you all right?" Daniel's voice was concerned. "I'm fine," she called back. "Just can't sleep with all this noise." There was a pause then. "May I come in?" Jessica hesitated, then said, "Yes." The door opened and Daniel entered, wearing a nightshirt and trousers, his hair disheveled from sleep or lack thereof. He carried a lamp, which cast a warm glow in the darkened room. "The storms can be fierce out here," he said, setting the lamp on the bedside table. "Thought I heard you moving around." "The baby doesn't seem to like the thunder," Jessica explained. "Every time there's a loud crack, he jumps." Daniel smiled more openly than she had ever seen. "Smart kid, knows trouble when he hears it." Another thunderclap made Jessica flinch, and Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, his presence oddly comforting. "When I was a boy in Pennsylvania," he said, "my mother used to tell me that thunder was just the angels moving furniture in heaven, made it less frightening somehow." "You never talk about your past," Jessica observed. "Not much worth talking about." Daniel's expression grew distant. "Left home at 16, worked my way west, tried my hand at mining, ranching, even ran with a rough crowd for a while. Then I met Mary and everything changed." Jessica hesitated, then asked softly, "Mrs. Holloway told me about your wife and son." "I'm so sorry, Daniel." He looked surprised at her use of his first name but didn't comment on it. "It was a long time ago, 6 years this October." "Does it get easier? The grief, I mean." Daniel considered the question, his eyes reflecting the lamplight. "Different, not easier. Some days I barely think about them. Others, the pain is as fresh as the day I lost them. He looked at her directly. How are you managing? With Thomas? Jessica smoothed the blanket across her lap. Some days I can hardly remember his face. Then I feel guilty, like I'm betraying him by forgetting. You're not betraying him by living, Jessica. Daniel's voice was gentle. He would want you to be happy, to move forward. Is that what you did? Moved forward. I tried. Came out here, became sheriff, built this place. He gestured around them. Filled my days with work and responsibilities. But moving forward isn't the same as moving on. I haven't done much of the latter. Jessica recognized the loneliness in his words, a reflection of her own. Impulsively, she reached for his hand. Thank you for telling me about Mary and your son. Daniel's fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. His name was going to be William after my father. We never even got to hold him. The vulnerability in his admission touched Jessica deeply. This was a side of Daniel Dawson few people ever saw, the grieving husband and father beneath the stern sheriff's exterior. They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the storm gradually move away, their hands still joined. Eventually, Daniel stood. Try to get some sleep, he said. Dr. Patterson is coming by tomorrow to check on you. Jessica nodded, suddenly reluctant to see him go. Good night, Daniel. Good night, Jessica. He paused at the door, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. For what it's worth, I think Thomas would be proud of how brave you've been. After he left, Jessica lay back against the pillows, her hand resting where his had been on her belly. For the first time since Thomas's death, she felt a sense of possibility that perhaps her life wasn't ending with the loss of her husband, but taking an unexpected turn toward something new. Dr. Patterson's visit the following day confirmed that Jessica and the baby were doing well, though he cautioned that she should start limiting her activities as she entered the final weeks of her pregnancy. The baby has dropped, he explained as he packed his bag. Could be any time in the next few weeks. First babies often come late, but not always. Daniel, who had been hovering nearby during the examination, asked, Is there anything specific we should be prepared for? The doctor smiled at his concern. Just the usual: clean linens, hot water when the time comes, and a calm environment. He patted Jessica's hand. You're young and healthy, Mrs. Barnes. I anticipate an uncomplicated delivery. After the doctor left, Daniel seemed preoccupied, spending more time than usual around the house rather than tending to his duties. Jessica caught him organizing medical supplies in the kitchen cabinet and moving furniture in the sitting room to create a more open space. What are you doing? She asked, finding him measuring the width of the doorway to her bedroom. Just making sure we can get a birthing chair through if needed, he replied, not meeting her eyes. Daniel, Jessica said, touching his arm to get his attention, are you worried about the birth? He finally looked at her, his expression troubled. Aren't you? Of course I am. But Dr. Patterson seems confident everything will be fine. Daniel's jaw tightened. Doctors were confident with Mary too. Understanding dawned on Jessica. This isn't going to be like what happened with your wife. Every birth is different. I know that logically, he admitted, but the thought of something happening to you or the baby. He trailed off, unable to complete the thought. Nothing's going to happen, Jessica said with more conviction than she felt. Childbirth was always risky, as she well knew, but she refused to give in to fear for her sake and for Daniel's. This baby is determined to make his way in the world. I can feel it. Daniel managed a small smile. Stubborn like his mother then. I prefer to call it determined, Jessica replied, returning his smile. The moment was interrupted by Mrs. Holloway calling them for lunch, but something had shifted again between them, an acknowledgement of mutual concern that went beyond obligation or duty. As August arrived, bringing slightly cooler temperatures and the first hints of autumn in the changing leaves, Jessica found herself increasingly confined to the house. Her body felt unwieldy, and simple tasks like climbing stairs left her breathless. Daniel and Mrs. Holloway hovered attentively, anticipating her needs often before she expressed them. One afternoon, Jessica was sorting through the baby clothes Mrs. Holloway had sewn when she felt a sharp pain across her abdomen. She gasped, clutching the edge of the table until it passed. "Just practice," she murmured to herself, having experienced these false labor pains before. But when another, stronger contraction gripped her 20 minutes later, she knew this was different. She made her way carefully to the kitchen, where Mrs. Holloway was preparing dinner. "I think it's starting," Jessica said calmly. Mrs. Holloway immediately set aside her work. "How far apart are the pains?" "About 20 minutes, but they're getting stronger." The housekeeper nodded. "Early yet, but we should prepare. I'll send one of the ranch hands for Dr. Patterson. The sheriff's in town today, but he should be back by sundown." Jessica was settled in her room, the bed prepared with clean linens and a layer of oilcloth. Mrs. Holloway brought her tea and helped her change into a loose nightgown. "Try to rest between the pains," the older woman advised. "You'll need your strength later." As the afternoon wore on, the contractions intensified and came closer together. Dr. Patterson arrived just as the sun was setting, his calm presence reassuring as he examined Jessica. "Coming along nicely," he pronounced. "The baby's in a good position. Now we wait." Daniel returned as darkness fell, bursting into the house with barely contained panic that transformed into relief when Mrs. Holloway assured him that everything was progressing normally. "Can I see her?" he asked. "Best not to disturb her now," the doctor advised. "First babies take time. Could be hours yet." But as the night deepened, Jessica's labor intensified rapidly. Her cries echoed through the house as the contractions came one after another with barely a pause between them. Daniel paced the hallway outside her room, flinching at every sound of her pain. Shortly after midnight, Dr. Patterson emerged from the bedroom, his expression concerned. "The baby's coming fast now, but there's a complication. It's turned slightly, and Mrs. Barnes is exhausting herself." Daniel's face paled. "What can be done?" "I'm going to try to turn it, but I'll need help." The doctor looked at Daniel steadily. "Mrs. Holloway's hands aren't strong enough for what I need. It has to be you." Daniel hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Tell me what to do." Inside the bedroom, Jessica was pale and sweat-soaked, her hair plastered to her forehead. She looked up in surprise when Daniel entered behind the doctor. "Daniel," she gasped between pains. "I'm here," he said, moving to her side and taking her hand. "The doctor needs my help. Is that all right?" Jessica nodded, then cried out as another contraction seized her. Dr. Patterson quickly explained what he needed Daniel to do to support Jessica's body in a specific position while the doctor attempted to turn the baby. "It will hurt," the doctor warned Jessica. "But it's necessary to help the baby." What followed was the most intense pain Jessica had ever experienced. She screamed, clutching Daniel's hand with bruising force as Dr. Patterson worked. Through it all, Daniel's voice was in her ear, steady and encouraging. "You're doing wonderfully," he murmured. "So strong, so brave. Just a little more." When the doctor finally announced that the baby had turned and was ready to be born, Jessica was nearly delirious with exhaustion. The final stage of labor passed in a blur of pain and effort, until at last the room was filled with the indignant cries of a newborn. "A boy," Dr. Patterson announced, placing the squalling infant on Jessica's chest. "A fine, healthy boy." Jessica stared in wonder at the tiny, red-faced creature, his fists clenched as if ready to fight the world. "Hello, little one," she whispered. I've been waiting to meet you." She looked up to share the moment with Daniel, but he had stepped back, his expression a complex mix of joy and remembered grief. Their eyes met across the room, and something profound passed between them, a shared triumph over fear, a new beginning rising from loss. "Thank you," Jessica said, the words inadequate for what she felt. Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "He's perfect, Jessica. Absolutely perfect." As dawn broke over the mountains, casting golden light through the bedroom window, Jessica held her son while Daniel sat beside the bed, his initial reserve melting as the baby wrapped a tiny hand around his finger. "Have you thought of a name?" Daniel asked. Jessica looked down at her son's face, so new and yet somehow familiar. "Thomas for his father," she said, "and Daniel for the man who protected us both." Daniel's eyes widened in surprise. "Jessica, you don't have to, I want to," she interrupted gently. "Thomas Daniel Barnes. It's a good name, a strong name." Daniel swallowed hard, visibly moved. "It is," he agreed softly. Mrs. Holloway appeared in the doorway with fresh linens, smiling at the tableau before her. "That boy's going to need his mother rested," she said. "And the sheriff has duties to attend to, I'm sure." Daniel stood reluctantly. "I'll be back this evening. Is there anything you need from town?" Jessica shook her head, suddenly overwhelmed by fatigue now that the ordeal was over. "Just come back," she said, her eyes already closing. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Daniel's face, transformed by a smile of such tenderness it made her heart ache. In the days that followed, Jessica discovered the exhausting, exhilarating reality of motherhood. Little Thomas already being called TD by Mrs. Holloway proved to have a healthy appetite and strong lungs. The household revolved around his needs, with Daniel often appearing at odd hours just to check on him, ostensibly ensuring that Jessica had everything she required. 2 weeks after the birth, Jessica was sitting in the rocking chair on the porch, nursing TD while watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink. Daniel rode up from the direction of town, dismounting with his usual fluid grace. He removed his hat as he approached, a gesture of respect that had become habitual whenever he saw her with the baby. "How are my two favorite people this evening?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her. "Hungry and tired, but otherwise well," Jessica replied with a smile. "How was town?" Daniel's expression darkened slightly. "Caldwell's been asking questions again. Wanted to know when you'd be returning to settle your husband's debts." Jessica tensed, instinctively holding TD closer. "What did you tell him?" "That Thomas Barnes's debts died with him, and if he had a problem with that, he could take it up with the territorial court." Daniel's jaw set in a hard line. "He won't bother you again, Jessica. I've made sure of it." She studied his face, noting the determination there. "What did you do?" "Let's just say I had a conversation with Judge Miller about certain irregularities in Caldwell's business practices." The judge suddenly remembered his duty to uphold the law rather than bend it for his friends. Daniel's smile held grim satisfaction. "Caldwell will be too busy defending himself against tax evasion charges to worry about you." Relief washed over Jessica. "So we're safe, truly safe." "You are." Daniel hesitated, then added, "which means you're free to leave whenever you wish. Your contract is fulfilled, and I've set aside money for you to start fresh, as I promised." Jessica felt her heart sink at his words. Despite everything, despite the growing feelings between them, he was still offering to send her away. "Is that what you want? For us to leave?" Daniel looked away, his profile strong against the fading light. "What I want doesn't matter. I made a promise to protect you and your baby, not to keep you here against your will." "And if it isn't against my will," Jessica asked softly, "if I want to stay?" He turned to her, hope and caution warring in his eyes. "Jessica, you've been through so much. Your husband's death, the auction, the baby. You might not be thinking clearly about what you want." "I think I see more clearly now than I ever have," she countered, shifting TD to her shoulder to burp him. "Daniel, when Thomas died, I thought my life was over. Then I was sold like property, and I thought things couldn't possibly get worse. But then you came, and you gave me safety and respect when no one else would." "Anyone with decency would have done the same," Daniel said, though they both knew that wasn't true, perhaps. But it wasn't anyone who did it. It was you. Jessica reached for his hand. "I know it hasn't been long, and I know you're still carrying the weight of Mary and your son. I'm not asking for promises or declarations. I'm just asking if there's a place for us here, beyond obligation." Daniel's fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. "There's always been a place for you here, Jessica. From the moment you stood on that auction block with your head held high, defying everyone who tried to break you." His voice roughened with emotion. "I told myself I was just keeping a promise to a man I barely knew, but the truth is, I couldn't bear to see you hurt. And now, Jessica prompted when he fell silent. "Now I can't imagine this place without you and TD in it." The admission seemed to cost him something, as if speaking the words made him vulnerable in a way he hadn't been in years. "But I won't keep you here out of gratitude or necessity." "What about love?" The word hung in the air between them, bold and undeniable. Daniel's eyes widened. "Jessica, I know it's soon," she rushed on. "I know I should mourn Thomas longer that you still mourn Mary. But life out here is too uncertain, too precious to waste pretending we don't feel what we feel." For a long moment, Daniel was silent, and Jessica feared she had misread everything: the looks, the touches, the shared moments of connection. Then he stood, taking TD gently from her arms and placing him in the cradle Mrs. Holloway had positioned nearby. When he turned back to Jessica, his expression was resolute. "I haven't let myself love anyone since Mary died," he said, offering his hand to help her up. "Convinced myself it wasn't worth the risk of loss. But watching you these past months, your courage, your strength, the way you love your son, I realized I was already risking loss by holding back." Jessica stood before him, her heart pounding. "What are you saying, Daniel?" "I'm saying I love you, Jessica Barnes. Not because I promised to protect you, not because you're Thomas's widow, but because you're you, stubborn and brave and more alive than anyone I've ever known." He cupped her face in his hands, his touch reverent. "And if you'll have me, I'd like to be a father to TD, to raise him alongside you, to build a life together right here." Tears sprang to Jessica's eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have for longer than I've been willing to admit." Daniel's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Then say you'll stay, not because you have nowhere else to go, but because this is where you want to be." "I'll stay," Jessica promised. "This is home now, you, me, and TD together." When Daniel finally kissed her, it was gentle at first, respectful of her still healing body and the newness of their declared feelings. But as Jessica responded, sliding her arms around his neck, the kiss deepened, carrying all the longing and hope they had been holding back. From the cradle, TD made a small noise reminding them of his presence. They broke apart, laughing softly. "I think he approves," Jessica said. Daniel looked down at the infant who had settled back to sleep. "Smart boy, gets that from his mother." As darkness fell over the Dawson ranch, they remained on the porch, talking quietly about the future they would build together. There would be challenges ahead: Daniel's dangerous work as sheriff, the lingering shadows of their past losses, the raised eyebrows of those who might think their union too quick after Jessica's widowhood. But in that moment, with the stars emerging above and TD Sleeping peacefully beside them, the future seemed full of promise. 3 months later, on a crisp November day with the mountains dusted in early snow, Jessica Barnes became Jessica Dawson in a small ceremony at the ranch. Dr. Patterson stood as witness, along with Mrs. Holloway and the ranch hands who had become like family. T.D., dressed in a tiny suit sewn by Mrs. Holloway, was held by the doctor's wife during the simple exchange of vows. "I take you as you are," Daniel said, his voice steady as he placed a gold band on Jessica's finger. "Loving what I know of you and trusting what I don't yet know. I will protect you and our son with everything I am, for all the days of my life." Jessica, radiant in a blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes, responded with equal conviction. "I take you as my husband, my partner, and T.D.'s father. I promise to stand beside you through whatever life brings, to create a home filled with love and laughter, and to remind you every day that some promises are meant to be kept forever." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Daniel's kiss held none of the hesitation of their first embrace. It was the kiss of a man who had found his way home after years of wandering, of a woman who had discovered strength she never knew she possessed. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful, with neighbors from miles around joining to wish them well. Even James Caldwell, much subdued after his legal troubles, stopped by briefly to offer congratulations and a tentative peace. As twilight descended, and the guests began to depart, Jessica found herself standing with Daniel on the same porch where they had confessed their love months earlier. T.D., now robust and alert at 5 months, was nestled in his father's arms, gazing up with adoration at the man who, by law and by love, was now truly his protector. "Happy, Mrs. Dawson?" Daniel asked, his free arm encircling her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," Jessica replied, leaning into his embrace. "Sometimes I still can't believe how much has changed in less than a year. From the lowest moment of my life on that auction block to this, it seems almost impossible." Daniel's expression grew serious. "Not impossible. Just proof that even in the darkest moments, something good can be waiting on the other side." He looked down at T.D., who had grasped his finger with surprising strength. "He's going to be as stubborn as both of us combined," Jessica laughed. "God help us all when he starts walking." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, they stood together, a family forged not by blood or obligation, but by choice and love. Jessica thought of all the twists of fate that had brought them to this moment: Thomas's death, her desperate situation, Daniel's promise to a man he barely knew. Out of tragedy had come a second chance for both of them, a new beginning that honored their pasts without being constrained by them. In the years that followed, the Dawson family flourished. Daniel eventually retired as sheriff to focus on expanding the ranch, which became known for its fine horses and fair business practices. Jessica, drawing on her head for numbers, kept the books and gradually built a small lending library for the surrounding area, bringing education and literature to families who had limited access to either. T.D. grew into a strong, thoughtful young man with his mother's determination and his adoptive father's sense of justice. He never knew Thomas Barnes except through Jessica's stories, but he carried his biological father's name with pride alongside the Dawson name that had given him a home and a future. 2 years after their wedding, Jessica gave birth to twins, a boy they named William, after the son Daniel had lost, and a girl called Mary Elizabeth, honoring both their pasts while embracing their future together. Later came another daughter, Sarah, whose arrival coincided with Mrs. Holloway's decision to move into the newly expanded main house as the children's beloved grandmother figure rather than a housekeeper. Life on the frontier remained challenging, with harsh winters, occasional droughts, and the everyday hardships of ranch life. But the foundation Daniel and Jessica had built first out of necessity, then out of choice, proved strong enough to weather whatever came their way. On the 10th anniversary of the day Daniel had purchased Jessica's contract at auction, they sat together on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set behind the mountains. "You ever think about that day?" Jessica asked, her hand finding Daniel's. "The auction," Daniel nodded, his thumb brushing over the wedding band he had placed on her finger a decade ago. "I remember how brave you looked, even when you were terrified, and how angry I was that anyone would treat another human being that way, especially a pregnant woman. I thought you were buying me for the same reasons as the others," Jessica admitted. "I had no idea you'd turn out to be the best man I've ever known." Daniel smiled, the lines at the corners of his eyes deepening. "And I had no idea that buying a pregnant widow's contract would lead to the richest life a man could ask for." He gestured toward their children. "Look at what we've built together, Jessica. All because you were brave enough to trust me, and I was finally brave enough to love again." As TD called for them to watch his latest feat of childhood daring, Jessica leaned against her husband's shoulder, content in the knowledge that sometimes, even in the wild uncertainties of the frontier, love could transform the most desperate circumstances into the greatest of blessings. The auction block that had once seemed like an ending had instead been the beginning of a journey neither of them could have imagined, a journey that had brought them home to each other.